Good evening. Today's subject is the civil war in Syria and some of the causes that are not in the public arena. There are many things said about this particular civil war. However, I'm going to concentrate on the bits that are not in the public domain. Firstly, as you probably know, the head of NATO's forces said a few years ago that one of his subordinates came out of a meeting and said that the United States had decided to invade 6 countries, naming Syria, Libya, Iran, Somalia, Lebanon, and one other country, I believe. So this was planned many years in advance. And as you probably know, this followed the Libyan civil war, where various Wahhabi extremists and other extremist hired killers were sent from Libya by the United States to a NATO base in Turkey called Incirlik, where they were transported across the border into Syria to start the civil war. Having said that, it is also true that there has been general discontent inside Syria, so it's a complicated issue. However, the situation was magnified many times by the intervention of the United States, Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia by transporting these hired mercenaries into Syria to cause absolute mayhem. One of the reasons they hide their faces is because they're not genuinely Syrian. The vast majority of fighters inside Syria have been imported there by NATO, by the United States, by Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. So these countries have a lot to answer for. Now, in response to that, Iran has been helping the Syrian government, but this was in direct response to who actually started all this. So if you want to talk about all foreigners leaving Syria, you have to say who were the initiators. You can't just say all foreigners in Syria have equal responsibility, because one side started this conflict, and in response, Iran and Russia have involved themselves to save Mr. Assad for their own reasons. Now, so why have they targeted Syria? Number one is Iran's best ally. Number two, the regime are basically Shiites, they're Alawite Shiites, and the Saudis, the Qataris are Sunnis. They don't like this Shiite regime. They're very independent. The Syrian regime is extremely independent. It will not take orders from any country, be it the United States or any other country. That inflames their opinion and makes them a target. Basically, any country that refuses to be a servant or a slave of the United States is immediately targeted. We had that with Libya, we have that with Iran, now we're having that with Russia. And that's what it's really about, basically. The other reason is, of course, refusing to deal in petrodollars. And one of the main issues that has not been talked about is Saudi Arabia wanted to build a pipeline to rival that of Iran. So the pipeline was going to go through Saudi Arabia, into Jordan, into Syria, into Turkey. And from Turkey, they were going to supply gas and oil to Europe. Now, Turkey said yes, as did Jordan, but Syria said no. So they were targeted. That's one of the reasons Saudi Arabia has been involved, for a pipeline to rival the Iranian pipeline that's going to go through Pakistan, and another pipeline that Iranians want to go through the Middle East to Turkey. That's why Turkey's relationship with Iran is extremely ambivalent. On the one hand, they're interfering in Syria, which is Iran's closest ally. On the other hand, they're cooperating with them on a whole host of other issues. So basically, realpolitik is, quite dirty, if you want to see it that way. Now, unfortunately, the people who paid the price are the Syrian people. 200,000 dead, and half the entire population, some 9 million people, have been displaced either internally or have gone abroad. This is a catastrophe for Syria and for the whole region. And the primary responsibility lies with the United States, with Britain, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar for their personal reasons. Unfortunately, this has increased tension with Russia as well. I don't see any way that the militants are going to destroy Assad, because Iran and Syria will send as many troops as is necessary to keep him together. Now, regarding the so-called barrel bombs by the Syrian army, well, if you look at it this way, if there's snipers inside the building targeting the population or targeting soldiers, if you send your own troops, you're going to have casualties for the rate of 4 to 6 per one. So 4 to 6 of your own soldiers will get killed for killing one of the mercenaries. So because of that, then the Syrian regime has no choice but to hit a particular building with barrel bombs, or with planes of various kinds, with missiles. So from their perspective, why on earth should they have their own soldiers killed rather than hitting a building? As far as they're concerned, if there's mercenaries shooting from a building, civilians should not be there. So I'm not trying to justify it, I'm trying to say this is their perspective. So it's a great tragedy. Now we're hearing that historic sites are being targeted by IS, and unfortunately things are going from bad to worse, and the conflict has spread to Iraq, and what used to be Al-Qaeda, supported by the United States, because of the bad press it got, it changed its name to Islamic State. Now, what is the reason for that? The reason being, people around the world were asking, how is it that Al-Qaeda in Iraq is the US's worst enemy, but Al-Qaeda in Syria is their best friend? So they had a public relations problem, so they decided to rename it ISIS. It's basically Al-Qaeda people plus a few Al-Nusra and other groups getting together. And then they realized that ISIS is actually the name of an ancient Egyptian goddess, which is not very Islamic notion, because Muslims do not believe in ancient Egyptian cultures in many gods. They believe in the one god, so they had another problem, so they had to rename themselves from ISIS to ISIL, replacing the word Syria with Levant, or simply IS, Islamic State. So that's how the name came about. This is the catastrophe. A couple of days ago they took Ramallah, and the Iraqi regime is only surviving with the help of Iran's Shiite militia, and the Iraqi army fled from the city of Ramallah, and look what has happened. An absolute catastrophe caused by the United States invasion of Iraq in 2003, and of course Britain and France also interfering in Libya's affairs, creating a catastrophe in that country. So these interventions have created catastrophe in Libya, catastrophe in Syria, catastrophe in Iraq, catastrophe in Afghanistan, and now a catastrophe in Ukraine. So every intervention that the West has been in has caused a catastrophe, absolute catastrophe. And now they want us to trust them even more, with even more invasions, creating more catastrophes. Thank you very much for listening to me, and please leave any comments. Thank you.